Right.
Okay, thanks. So the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And good afternoon, good evening to anybody, whichever applies to you. Thank you so much for this great conference. I really like to be part of it. Uh, just maybe shortly, I should introduce myself. I'm coming from a Turkish background. I'm Kurdish. This Yazidism is a part of my grandparents' religion, or the area that they really moved to Turkey. So they were moving from Iraq and Sinjar region of Iraq and Syria to Turkey. So this religion was part of their daily life. So I recognized that spread lately, and I wanted to read and understand what this religion is really meaning. And I'm actually a philosopher of religion, and I've always studied on analytic philosophy of religion, and I wanted to see how this Yazidism's background really applies to philosophy of religion. And today my talk is going to be primarily on this topic. And I will also try to understand its syncretic nature and introduce the concept of fluid metaphysics for this religion. But however, this tradition, which has historically elicited significant antagonism because it was in the Middle East, it elicited significant antagonism, resist conscious summarization. So this will be the first challenge to understand this religion with the concepts of philosophy of religion. Yazidism is not a religion of the book. It is so-called sacred texts are transmitted orally, and literacy was historically prohibited among Yazidis until recently, until 1970s maybe. As a tradition-oriented move more towards orthopraxy than orthodoxy, it lacks a single doctrinal statement. Contemporary scholarship occasionally situates Yazidism within the category of other Islamic sects or in between sects like Druze and Baha'ism. This study, however, approaches Yazidism not from a historical perspective, but as a subject of philosophical inquiry. While its unique structure makes it challenging to classify under a single category, this analysis seeks to eliminate its position within the philosophy of religion primarily. Ultimately, I argue that for reasons to be elaborated, Yazidism and tentatively speaking, of course, traditions of similar characters, especially all orally transmitted ethno-religions, should be examined maybe within the framework of fluid metaphysics that I'm going to present. The Yazidis, also referred to as the people of Peacock Angel, are an ethno-religious group primarily residing in the mountainous regions of northern Iraq and with smaller communities in Syria, Turkey, Armenia, Georgia, as well as a significant diaspora in Europe, especially in Germany. Ethnically, they are Kurdish, although there are some discussions about it, but mostly they are Kurdish. They speak Kurmanji. They are deeply rooted in a form of an Islamic Sufism, but with multiple elements from Christianity, Gnosticism, local pagan cults, and many others. Because of their religious idiosyncrasy, they have been traditionally viewed as pagans, heretics, or devil worshippers, and have therefore remained for centuries an object of persecution. Despite this persecution and a generally following displacement, the Yazidis have preserved their distinct cultural and religious identity, which is deeply tied to their ancestral lands and oral tradition within their religion. Their religious belief, Yazidism, blends elements of ancient Mesopotamian, Zoroastrian, and Abrahamic traditions with a focus on two central figures. The one is Khuda, which means the supreme deity, and the other one is the Tausi Melek, literally meaning the peacock angel. In Yazidism, Khuda sometimes, henceforth, I sometimes may use God. When I use God, I'm referring to Khuda. And when I use angel, I may be referring to Tausi Melek. In Yazidism, Khuda represents the supreme deity, embodying the concept of an ultimate transcendent creator. He is viewed as an abstract and ineffable being beyond human comprehension, who created the universe and delegated its governance to subordinate spiritual beings, which are the heptad of seven holy beings, which we call Heftsir. Among these, Tawsi Melek holds the most prominent role as the intermediary and active ruler of the world, as getting into contact with Khuda requires a mediator, and that mediator is the peacock angel. When I say peacock angel, you do not think of this as just a symbol. When I visited Mardin, a Turkish city, and Yazidis on site, they were just literally kind of carrying peacocks under their like shoulders. They have peacocks all over their lives, all around. However, unlike monotheistic traditions where God intervenes directly, Khuda in Yazidi theology rarely interacts with the material realm. So this detachment emphasizes the decentralized nature of divine authority in Yazidism, with Tawsi Melek also acting as the functional manifestation of divine will. Tawsi Melek represents the very essence of Yazidi religion to the extent that it also serves as an eponym for the Yazidis. They are called literally the people of Peacock Angel. Tawsi Melek is portrayed as a benevolent and powerful being entrusted with the governance of the world as the first and most faithful angel of God. According to Yazidi creation myths, Tawsi Melek was the first of 7 archangels created by Khuda. He passed the test of loyalty by refusing to bow to any being other than the Creator, demonstrating his unwavering devotion. This act, misunderstood by outsiders, has often led to the false association of Yazidis with devil worship, a misconception actually stemming from Tawsi Melek's misunderstood role and his rebellion-like narrative. The peacock symbolizes divine beauty, mystery, and renewal in Yazidism, with its vibrant plumage reflecting the diversity and unity of creation. Tawsi Melek is celebrated for his role in maintaining cosmic harmony, guiding humanity and fostering spiritual enlightenment. So his image is central to Yazidi rituals and is often represented in sacred objects and oral traditions, underscoring his importance in the faith. While these two figures represent distinct aspects of divine and play unique roles in the creation and governance of the world, their interplay raises significant philosophical questions about how the divine operates within the Yazidi tradition, because they have been always like when you look at the scholarly works in the West, you will see that Yazidism is taken as an Islamic sect under other Islamic sects or in between sects, so still an Islamic sect. But when I look at them as a monotheist and from a monotheistic perspective or a philosophy of religion perspective, I see that there are lots of, contradictions. So I'm actually trying to see whether this is solvable. Beyond these central figures, Yazidism encompasses a diverse pantheon of deities and spirit guardians, whose origins and roles are challenging to trace due to the limited availability of historical and theological materials. Adding to this complexity, the Yazidi religion is marked by the coexistence of seemingly conflicting ideas drawn from various traditions, preserved over time in the absence of a strict doctrinal framework, which highlights Khuda's role as both transcendent and immanent. This reality challenged the traditional concepts of God, such as very different gods, actually, such as henotheism, panentheism, and deism. However, due to the lack or authenticity of written text, as I said, the oral nature of the tradition and the community's cautious practices, of course, these are all rooted in a history of genocides and persecutions, leaves critical questions about divine attributes such as omnipotence, omniscience, and moral perfection largely unanswered and always ambiguous. At this point, an absence of literature, that canonized literature, an oral religious code of Yazidis, yet the folkloric religious texts that I have used for this paper, particularly within the context of a wider analysis, provide material quite sufficient for research needs. Taking these challenges into account, focusing on the metaphysics of Yazidism and how fluid metaphysics is shaped is possible, with particular emphasis to their 2 so-called holy books. The one is Misafaresh, literally meaning the black book. It's in Kurdish. and the Kitab al-Jilwe, the Book of Revelation, which used to be in Arabic, but we have translations of them into English now. I have analyzed this text, and now I will share some of the henotheistic elements in Yazidism, where Taus Melek is also worshipped as a supreme being while recognizing other divine figures. The panentheistic aspects, highlighting the belief in God's immanence beside transcendence within creation and operation in the world, and the deistic tendencies reflected in the notion of a distant God who creates but then delegates, or no delegation, of course, worldly affairs to intermediaries like Taus Melek. I also will discuss whether these different concepts of God work harmoniously within the Yazidi framework of divine attributes such as omnipotence and omniscience. By all this analysis, I aim to offer a more nuanced understanding of Yazidi metaphysics, which I call fluid metaphysics. This term is employed to capture the distinctive features of Yazidi metaphysical thought, characterized by its emphasis on the dynamic and relational aspects of metaphysical principles. Fluid metaphysics provides a philosophical framework that accommodates the coexistence and interaction of diverse modes of divine operation, making it part of ethno-religion. So I'm tentatively offering a model also with this study. Now let me share my ideas on divine attributes of Yazidi concept of God. The Yazidi ideas on God are quite hazy and blurred and can be subjected to systematic processing only with great difficulty. Khuda is little reminiscent of the absolute Allah in Islam or the all-forgiving and merciful God of the Christianity. The main thing that makes him equivalent to one God of the theistic religions, and what actually is essential, is his transcendentality and his function of demerge as the creator. However, according to the Yazidi tradition, despite being creator of the universe, God is completely indifferent to its fate. He is not concerned with worldly affairs or human fortune. In the context of Yazidi metaphysics, I argue that two key aspects are central to examining whether Yazidism can be coherently captured within a single concept of God, as is often contended, or whether it represents an integration of conventional frameworks such as henotheism, panentheism, and deism. These aspects are the first one is the role of intermediaries with Taus Melek as the central figure, and the second one is the divine attributes like omnipotence and omniscience that remarkably have yet not to be thoroughly examined or maybe even not emphasized in the Yazidi context. One of the attributes, omnipotence, plays a significant role in understanding Yazidi metaphysical frameworks. In Yazidi thought, omnipotence is attributed to Khuda, who is recognized as the creator of the universe and the ultimate source of power. However, the governance of the world is delegated to Taus Melek and the other archangels, 7 of them, but Taus Melek is the leader of them. This delegation complicates the understanding of omnipotence as it raises questions about the extent of Khuda's active control over the world after creation. Omniscience represents another key attribute here, with Khuda regarded as all-knowing. However, the delegation of authority to Taus Melek complicates the dynamic of how divine knowledge is assessed and manifested in the world if Taus Melek has all this power in the world. In Yazidism, often characterized as monotheistic, the prominent and at times complex role attributed to the angel reveals that this tradition extends beyond a strictly monotheistic framework. In their oral tradition, Melek Taus is even described as Beshirik Behewal, which means having no companion or friend, or in other words, the only one, which is undoubtedly the attribute of God transferred to this image. In a variant of the Yazidi symbol of statement of faith, the Melek is um, sorry. In a variant of Yazidi symbol of faith, the Melek is features directly after Khuda. The symbol of faith of Yazidis is an oral transmitted statement, and there are many different versions of this statement actually. I attest that my faith is given in the name of God and Melek Taus. Do you see God and Melek Taus are taken together here? In another version of the same text, Melek Tavus and Khuda are both featured as symbols of fate, Melek Tavus himself also being characterized as fate. The testimony of my faith is one God. Melek Tavus is the symbol of my faith and also my faith. These and many similar sayings highlights and support my claim of fluidity through diverse conceptions of God. Based on this observation and depending on one's interpretative framework, the notions of omnipotence and omniscience in Yazidism can be understood in various ways. This is also evident in the so-called Book of Revolution of Yazidism, where a monotheistic conception of God is prominent. Here you will see that. In the first chapter, God is portrayed as entirely monotheistic, omnipotent, omniscient, eternal, and responsive. Uh, Let me read some parts of this chapter. Also, you have a rather lengthy one on your screens now. I was, am now, and shall have no end. A clear statement of eternality. I exercise dominion over all creatures and over the affairs of all who are under the protection of my image. So I'm not sure whether this image is God or Tausimelech. I'm ever present to help all who trust in me and call upon me in time of need. So we see that he is also omnipresent and also responsive. A responsive God is also, as classically understood in philosophy of religion, is also ma'bud, as our friend referred like in minute ago. He is also personal. He responds to your prayers. So he has all the omniscience and omnipotence to give you what you really ask for. So there is no place in the universe that knows not my presence. No God has a right to interfere in my affairs, and I have made it an imperative rule that everyone shall refrain from worshipping all gods. We see a strict monotheistic statement here. It's also against shirk, against polytheism. To me, truth and falsehood are known. When temptation comes, I give my covenant to him that trusts in me. Moreover, I give. So this last part here, it gets complicated, right? The last sentence. Moreover, I give counsel to the skilled directors, for I have appointed them for periods that are known to be. So we are not whether sure that in these holy books whether these directors are angels or other deities or people as we are as agents. So it's not clear. The Black Book, on the other hand, at first glance is this was a script from Book of Revelation, first chapter. So I'm now talking about the Black Book, which is Misafaresh, which was originally in Kurdish. The Black Book, on the other hand, at first glance is a mixture of biblical, Muslim, and local traditions, with sometimes controversial and awkward formulations, along with a distinct explication of the role of Tavus Melek, in the universe and of his place within the divine hierarchy. It also contains a clear allusion that the same character has features of the fallen angel expelled from heaven for violating the divine command and misleading Adam. Building on these two so-called holy scriptures, I will now examine the elements of henotheism in Yazidi tradition, within the Yazidi tradition. A henotheistic perspective emphasizes a hierarchical distribution of power and knowledge between Khuda and Tausimelik. In contrast, other frameworks, such as panentheism or deism, may reinterpret these attributes in ways that emphasize divine immanence or transcendence, respectively. Yazidi religious knowledge and perceptions present an intriguing case of henotheism, where a single deity Khuda is acknowledged as utterly transcendent, yet the divine activity is mediated through various manifestations. Although categorized as monotheistic, I'm really stressing this point because Yazidism nearly has always been like recognized as a monotheistic religion, and I'm really arguing against this. References to the singular Khuda and also are sparse, and the focus is placed instead on the roles of Melek Taus and other divine agents, such as six angels, minor deities like thunder gods, the Lord of wind and air, the God of shepherds, and celestial bodies also, and central animals like Carmelian, as we call it in English. I don't know whether I call it English perfect, but Carmelian. This framework, where Khuda's transcendent coexists with an active recognition of other divine entities, resonates with the henotheistic paradigm of worshipping a supreme deity while also acknowledging the existence and agency of others within the cosmos. In Yazidi practice, Tawsi Melek is the primary object of veneration, while Khuda is recognized as the supreme transcendent creator. Tawsi Melek holds a dominant position in the Yazidi cosmological order also, serving as the intermediary between the material world and divine source. For the philosophers, this is very similar to the Plotinus's the soul. From the one emanates the soul, and it is really it really surprised me when I first read the. It's also very similar to the active intellect of Avicenna, and thus received the majority of religious attention. Of course, this religious attention is different than Plotinus and Avicenna. However, this henotheistic classification becomes complicated in Yazidism due to the unique nature of Tawsi Melek's role. According to one understanding, Tawsi Melek is not merely one god among many lesser deities, actually, nor is he worshipped in isolation from Khuda. Instead, he's said to be an extension of Khuda's will, acting as the governing force in the world while also embodying divine attributes. This is complicated. But even if one could say that this kind of an understanding creates a dynamic where Tawsi Melek's power and status do not indicate a polytheistic hierarchy, but rather reflect a unified divine source expressed through multiple channels, Yazidism has elements that do not resemble any other doctrine but the henotheism, particularly in the veneration of this angel. Also, even if we accept that the divine hierarchy is structured more as a manifestation of same divine will, rather than a pantheon of competing or lesser gods, it is still a question: what are the nature of the angels that God created after Melek Taus and made him the ruler of all? A panentheistic interpretation of Yazidism, on the other hand, suggests that Khuda's omnipotence extends beyond mere creation, as it manifests both within and outside the universe through Tawsi Melek's governance. He is always in action. Similarly, his omniscience extends to encompass the entirety of the universe and all experiences within it, with Tawsi Melek serving as the active embodiment of this divine knowledge. This dynamic suggests that while Khuda remains above and beyond the world, his presence is made imminent through Tawsi Melek. With these explanations, panentheism, which posits that God is both transcendent and immanent, existing beyond the world while also being present within it, might be a more fitting description of Yazidi metaphysics. Tawsi Melek governs the material world, embodying divine authority and power, and the Khuda, permeates the world through his intermediary figure, even as the ultimate source of divinity remains transcendent. This is very much like the process theism of Alfred North Whitehead and Mohammed Iqbal, and maybe I could push it to Charles Hartshorne. Additionally, the role of Tawsi Melek as both an extension of divine will and an autonomous agent in world governance deepens the panentheistic character of Yazidism. Like we are the in process theology, we are like the cells of a body. Body is God, and we are the parts of that body, and we kind of has effect on God. Tawsi Melek kind of seems to be similar. Tawsi Melek is I don't say pantheism, because Tawsi Melek does not have that divinity, like everything is God and Tawsi Melek is God. That's why I'm calling it panentheistic. Instead of a distant, disengaged God, Yazidism sees divine activity as continuous and relational, expressed through Tawsi Melek's involvement in the affairs of the world. This relationship complicates the notion of transcendence and suggests a dynamic interplay between the divine and creation, where divine power remains ever present and active, which is the most important. Alternatively, one other way to understand the angels, Melek Taus's role in Yazidism, can be not as a delegation of divine knowledge and power, but rather as a symbolic representation within the religion, devoid of divine attribution. This interpretation allows for a deistic perspective, in which Khuda's omnipotence is confined to the act of creation. Within this framework, the deity doesn't intervene in the world after creation, and divine omniscience is also understood as pertaining solely to this moment of creation, nothing more, without encompassing ongoing awareness of subsequent events. Here, Khuda's role resembles the very deistic model in that he is largely passive following the act of creation. Tausimelek and the other archangels are symbols of causation in the world, like secondary causes in the world. They have no causal power, or nor are they agents of any kind. It's not an accident that in the Yazidi liturgy, as well as in the oral tradition, direct address to Khuda is made only on very rare occasions, but to Tausi Melek is way more than that. However, unlike strict deism here, I should note this. Yazidism's maintaining a sense of ongoing divine engagement through Tausi Melek is still a question at this point. So, although we cannot say it is literally a deistic understanding, we could say a semi-deistic, some parts of are very similar. The withdrawal of Khuda seems to be not complete, as divine power and authority are still expressed through an active governance of Taus Melek, if of course it would be accepted as an intervention and not as causation. After this discussion, one could say that one of the primary challenges in Yazidi metaphysics is maintaining philosophical consistency in its depiction of the divine. Western philosophical traditions often demand that attributes such as omnipotence, omniscience, and moral perfection be applied coherently and uniformly to a single divine figure. Yazidism complicates these expectations by distributing divine attributes across multiple figures. As I said, Khuda is transcendent and Taus Melek is the immanent governor. This distribution raises important philosophical questions, of course. If Khuda is truly omnipotent, why is Taus Melek given such extensive control over the world? Does this delegation of power diminish Khuda's omnipotence, or does it represent a different mode of divine operation? In the case of Yazidism, one possible resolution to this tension is to view Khuda and Taus Melek's relationship as non-dualistic. And of course, this is an this non-dualistic understanding is not mine, but I'm afraid if we even understand it as a non-dualistic, then this would pave the way for pantheism at best. So it is not also the best understanding of Yazidism, or the compact all-in-one understanding of Yazidism. So at this point, let me ask this: is it possible to understand Yazidi metaphysics as a dynamic relational theology where divine power operates through different modes? Yazidi metaphysics challenged the assumption that the divine must be describable in strictly coherent and consistent terms, because, rooted in oral tradition, it may intentionally resist the kind of systematic theological clarity that philosophy often demands. I say intentionally. Yazidi metaphysics offers a unique and complex vision of the divine that defies easy classification. Instead, it presents a dynamic interplay in which lies its ability to embrace fluidity, adaptability. Now I will talk about some aspects of history of Yazidism and try to, conclude my talk. In the context of Yazidism, fluid metaphysics describes the interplay between transcendence, immanence, and the shifting roles of divine figures in their theological and cosmological narratives. Yazidism exemplifies fluid metaphysics by integrating elements from very different concepts of God. These elements interact dynamically, not as a fixed categories, but as complementary perspectives. The reason behind the fluidity lies in the history of Yazidism. The emergence of Yazidis as a distinct ethno-religious community occurred between the 11th and 14th centuries in the Sinjar region of northern Iraq. This process of religious differentiation unfolded within the highly diverse religious landscape of Mesopotamia, where various interpretations of Islam and Christianity intersected with Gnostic influences and indigenous folk traditions. But the primary nucleus of Yazidi community was an Islamic Sufi sect, Adawiya order. While retaining certain mystical elements from this sect of Islam, Yazidism assimilated a range of disparate and occasionally contradictory components from the broader religious currents of the region. And I tie this reality to the displacement and the 74 different genocides attempts that they experience. I will come to that. They were also influenced by heterodox and marginal traditions that flourished at a distance from established centers of religious orthodoxy. Nonetheless, Yazidism also exhibits profoundly distinctive features, some of which are unparalleled within the broader Iranian religious sphere. So you see these are lots of elements from really different and differing cultures, right? There are lots of elements that shape their religions. In Yazidi theology, Melek Tavus not only adds complexity to the God-universe relationship, but also functions as a means of connecting the Zoroastrian religious heritage with theistic traditions. Historically, as I mentioned, the Yazidis have been labeled as devil worshippers due to the widespread misunderstanding and misinterpretations of their religious beliefs, particularly surrounding the veneration of Tawsi Melek, which is one of the main factors contributing to the fluidity inherent in this religion, as I argue. According to a very strong narrative in Yazidism, the angel is regarded as one of the most important angels of God, similar to Satan or Lucifer before his fall. Sourcing from this narrative, some Islamic and Christian arguments mistakenly identify Tawsi Melek with Satan or Iblis due to the superficial parallels, such as the narrative of refusing to bow to Adam. However, in Yazidi tradition, this refusal is seen as an act of loyalty to God, not rebellion. Yazidism, therefore, diverges significantly from mainstream monotheistic traditions by rejecting the common creation story and shared understanding of Satan's fall in those traditions. Yazidism's unique cosmology and lack of alignment with mainstream Abrahamic theological categories often lead outsiders to project their own frameworks onto Yazidi beliefs, interpreting them through the lens of heresy. These interpretations have resulted in physical displacement from ancestral lands 74 times, cultural erasure attempts and marginalization, yet they have simultaneously give rise to a robust oral tradition that preserve the Yazidi identity. As they experienced all this 74 and displacement attacks or genocide attacks, they changed their religious culture into an oral religion, so and transmit it like in the community. There was like until 1970s, it was forbidden to talk Yazidi religion to non-Yazidis. The historical persecution of the Yazidis by neighboring religious and political powers, which was often used as a propaganda to delegitimize the Yazidi community and portrayed them as religiously deviant, pushed Yazidism toward radical secrecy with so-called sacred texts and practices reserved for initiated members only. It was not open to anybody. If you dare to open it, then you would be, out of Yazidism. This secrecy has in turn fueled further speculation and negative stereotyping among those unfamiliar with their belief systems. The dispersion of Yazidis across regions such as Middle East, the Caucasus, Europe, Russia, and Anatolia, combined with the secrecy surrounding their faith, has paved the way for diverse interpretations of this religion. The followers of Yazidism have contributed to varying understanding of the relationship between God and the angel, shaped by specific geographical, temporal, political, and religious contexts in which they lived and they practiced their religions. In regions or periods influenced by Islamic or Christian monotheism, Yazidism often adopts a more monotheistic tone, emphasizing God's transcendence while degrading the distinct role of Melek Tavus to a symbol of their religion with no divine power. In areas or times influenced by mystical traditions such as Sufi, Al-Haq, or Adawiya orders, Yazidism may interpret the relationship between God and Melek Tavus in panentheistic terms, highlighting divine unity within diversity. In secular or philosophical contexts, interpretations of God's role may shift toward deism, emphasizing the autonomy of God other than creation. I mean, in more syncretic environments, Yazidism may exhibit more henotheistic characteristics, with Melek Tavus taking a central role in religious practice and theological reflection. In conclusion, the diversity in Yazidism interpretations of relationship between God and Melek Tavus underscores its theological fluidity. This fluidity reflects the interplay between the religion's inherent secrecy, the cosmological of Melek Tavus, and external influences of surrounding cultures and belief systems. Depending on the geographical, political, and religious milieu, Yazidism theological framework adapts to survive. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.